go of everything.
So now that we have our sketch for our caricature of Ian McKellen, we're ready to begin taking it from something that feels very two-dimensional and flat to something that starts to feel more three-dimensional, that has a stronger sense of form, and that'll be by blocking in values. And when I say values, I mean your darks and your lights. And we're not going to get into coloring this caricature in this course. We're going to stick to grayscale. I really just want us to focus on really building out these forms for these different characteristics, these different facial features that we've exaggerated, just nailing down those forms and rendering them as best as possible. Okay, so before we jump headway into that, the first thing I really want to do is change the color of the background to something other than white. White can often be very jarring to the eye and kind of distracting when you're trying to work in shadows and highlights. So I'm going to grab my paint bucket tool from my tool panel over here, and let's go to our swatch panel. I'm just going to grab a darker gray, and I'm going to fill in the background layer. You'll notice I've got another layer here which I've added and titled base, and so I just want to put a base value over the entire caricature sketch that we have here, kind of a mid-tone value, something not too dark, not too light, that we can build upon as we work in additional shadows and highlights. So I'm going to grab my brush tool. I'm just going to right-click over the canvas, bringing up my brush preset picker. I'm going to use this hard round default brush. We'll go ahead and take up the size, and let's go back to our swatches. I'm just going to use a 50% gray swatch. That'll be a nice mid-tone value for us to use. And let's just go ahead and start roughing that in. It doesn't have to be pretty. And again, it's just a good mid-range value for us to build upon. We'll be able to work in our shadows and our highlights, all the varying values for our caricature with just a little bit more clarity. Okay? All right, very nice. And so as we start blocking in these values, it's going to still be meant to be very rough, kind of like our sketch. So when I do that, I like to go ahead and take my brush tip and flatten it down. I like to angle it. Kind of gives us a nice chiseled kind of look. I'm still using the hard round brush. If you're not seeing this option to do that right here in your brush preset picker when you right click and bring it up, that's because they've added it in the newest version of Photoshop CC, which is what we're working in. Typically, you would go to your brush panel under brush tip shape. It would be right there. While we're in our brush panel, I want to go ahead and turn on transfer. I'm using a Wacom Cintiq with a stylus, so I want to take full advantage of that. And so in doing so, I want to have pen pressure set to both controls for opacity and flow so that I can dictate the opacity and flow based off of how much pressure I apply to my screen. Switching to black as my foreground color, we'll go ahead and jump to our value blocking layer that I've added. And I like the lighting setup of this image right here. I think it's got the strongest lighting of all of them. Just has a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to kind of reference that. Doesn't mean we're matching it, because obviously it's not going to be matched exactly, because we're creating a caricature over here. We've exaggerated a lot of features, but we can kind of pull from it. Okay? So what I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of blocking in some shadows. And you can tell I can dictate kind of these values, the intensity of some of these values, based off of how much pressure I'm applying with my stylus. Okay? So I'm just kind of looking around some of these different areas, kind of here on just the right side of his face, or the left side of his face, but the screen right, rather. And I'm just kind of working in some of those different areas. And so, again, you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on any one area. You just want to kind of work around the entire image and just kind of start roughing this in. Okay, we're not at a point right now where we're trying to blend anything. We'll kind of start doing that in the next lesson. But this is just an opportunity to kind of start getting a sense of how you want your lighting to be, where you want those darks in your lights. So I'm just kind of working my way around here, kind of studying different areas. And again, I'm still just using black as my foreground color, just kind of dabbing in different areas here, like in the hair that I kind of see are darker, kind of right in there. Okay. And then just kind of over some different areas, kind of pushing some of those little occlusion shadows, little dark areas. Occlusion shadows are basically areas where just the light just can't hardly reach. So we got a few just little areas like that, kind of in the ears, kind of around the neck. Periodically, I'll change the size of my brush tip to do this. Already, just what little messy blobbing in of values that I've done here, I'm starting to have a good sense of the form. I'll go ahead and switch to white as my foreground color. And I'll just kind of start working in some highlights. And again, just keeping it very loose. Very loose, kind of thinking, just kind of noticing little kind of highlights right there in the ball of the nose. Coming here around just on the ear, kind of working in some of those little highlights. Kind of a strong highlight kind of right there on that cheekbone, so I want to kind of carry that over to my exaggerated cheekbone. So again, the more values you start to kind of work in, the more you'll start kind of sampling just by holding down Alt on your, whether it's on your keyboard or an Express key on your tablet or Cintiq. And so thus the entire image becomes your palette once you get in a lot of these values worked in. Okay. But already we have something that feels a lot less flat than it did just a few minutes ago. Okay. Starting to feel like we're starting to get a little bit of form built up. Okay, and you can make that comparison very easily. Okay. All right. All right, so now that I've kind of got a lot of these values blocked in, what I'm going to be focusing on in the next lesson is kind of taking just a lot of these values and start focusing on different areas to start tightening up the form. We're going to start blending values. So kind of stick around, and in our next lesson, we'll go ahead and focus on blending values and continuing on with our caricature.